On today's show, we have a special guest. We have a man who was in Oxford during the Confederate Rally. I'm talking about Tyler Fonde. Very few people know Ole Miss athletics and things around Oxford better than this guy. We've also got a fun little section I'd like to call the top 10 things you probably didn't know about Robert Kraft. Also, why no league should sign Colin Kaepernick for $20 million, and also what the Alliance has done right in pro football. Thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bryant Rowe Show. Alright folks, let's cut to the chase. I'm going to bring you in on that pre-recorded interview done just earlier today with my good friend Tyler Fonde, a current Ole Miss student. Here it is.
Hello.
Alright folks, few people know more about Ole Miss athletics and things Ole Miss than my longtime friend Tyler Fonde. Fonde, how you doing today?
I am doing very well, Bryant. The sun is out here in Oxford. We had a rainy week last week. It has finally cleared up. We're living the dream. All is great, my man.
Fonde, I first off just really want to thank you, and I appreciate you coming on. You were in Oxford this weekend during the event where Devontae Shuler took a knee and several other players followed. What happened from your point of view?
Yeah, so, Devontae's been on the team for a couple years. There was a lot going on in Oxford last week. We had an uninvited but an allowed group traveled here from Arkansas. They had been going around the South. It's kind of a Confederate rights group. I think the name of them is Confederate 901. Anyways, they had
that is correct.
Come and travel with, they kind of march with Confederate flags and signs and whatnot. And they were going to do it from, the center of campus to, kind of the city center, which is the Oxford Square, which is about, roughly a mile away from the center of campus. And so, there were some protests and rallies kind of against them being here. And, with all this stuff going on our campus, it's not a good reflection of Oxford, obviously. But you know what? These people are from out of town. And so Devontae, on the biggest stage that he has, he took a knee during the national anthem, and several others. I know Breein Tyree, Terrence Davis, I think Blake Hinton. I think it was about 7 or 8 of the guys, took a knee with him. And you know what? I got to say, I think in this particular scenario, when you have a hate group, a few hundred yards from where you're playing a basketball game on campus, I think this was a response that they felt was right, and I got to back them on it in this particular scenario.
So you talked about what happened, and obviously I've been reading some stuff from the national news, but what is the general reaction from Oxford in particular?
Yeah, do you want the reaction to the team's response, or the events as a whole, or the hate group Confederate 901 being here?
From the people, both on campus and I'll say the general Oxford local community.
Okay, yeah. First of all, as far as, the Confederate 901 group, you know what? If it was illegal, if we could somehow make it illegal for, people to come spread hate speech, I'm sure we would, but technically this falls under their First Amendment right, so they're allowed to do it. But you know what? The people in Oxford, they don't agree with that message that's being spread, and I think that's why that, maybe overwhelmingly during, some of the Kaepernick kneeling and how that kind of took off in the NFL, I think overwhelmingly people here were opposed to that. But then on Saturday, when our boys took that stand, like I said, it's all about, the particular scenario and the extra details. But since they were on campus, I think everyone responded really well. You know what? We don't stand for that group coming here. Everyone backed our basketball team. Our coach, our athletic director, Ross Bjork, he made a statement, backing the team, and I think that was important. I think Oxford and the Ole Miss community came out looking good despite all that was happening.
So Fonde, for those who are not in Oxford or don't know the people from Oxford and may merely read headlines and associate the presence of these groups with a prejudice of racism, for those living in Oxford, what is your response to that?
That's a good question. And this is something, I obviously, as you say, like the outside, looking in at perception can be really affected by people's, the quick read of an article of, like a group stopping by, in Oxford to do that. And I think it's unfair. It's unfortunate. We have a great, this is just it's such a great little town here in Mississippi. And it's, one of my good family friends who's, lived here for 15 years, grew up in Tupelo, which is about 30 miles from here. He's in his 60s now, and he just talks about how Oxford is an oasis. And it is, and to be honest, this town is pretty liberal. It's pretty progressive. Obviously it's a small college town. The professors and the administrators, they all live here. Their kids go to schools here. The public schools in Oxford are the best in the state. And so I think that, when a group, like the Confederate 901 group that came last weekend, when they come in and they're rejected by the people of Oxford in the town, there's no other people that were going to join them. This was just them on their own. And I think that that's kind of unfortunate because it does put off that perception that, like, maybe there's people that share those values here, but it's just not the case.
In general, how often would you say these types of groups take part in activities on or near the Ole Miss campus?
Oh, this is not a very common occurrence. Since I have been, this is my 5th year living in Oxford. This was the one that got the most kind of coverage. I know there's, stuff has happened throughout the years before I've been here. But since I've been here, this was the kind of the biggest event that really pops into my head that people really talked about. But it was also the first time that, sometimes these groups would come and they'd leave and whatever, and, they have to talk to, campus police department and the city police department. So, like, people know when they're coming. But there was such a large student response this time, in opposition. We had students, marching and rallying the day before they arrived while they were here. I think even, I'm sure, the day after. I think this has probably happened a couple times, but this was probably the biggest and the one that had the most notoriety come along with it. And to be honest, it ended without much disruption. These people are naive, and they come to spread a message that, people here don't agree with. And so I think that was pretty clear. So, yeah, the answer to your question, I think it's happened a couple times. But this would have been the biggest incident.
You talked about a couple counter-protest efforts. What was the reaction toward those efforts?
Yeah, I think, on the national media side, they got those students that were out there marching in opposition, they got a lot of support. First of all, there was a lot of students. It was all student-led. Of course, when it comes to, college and university, we can kind of speak out against it, but you can't really disallow it because, it's public property. It's publicly funded. But for the students of this university to kind of make that stand, you got to say it was cool. Anytime there's a student-led, essentially a grassroots campaign of sorts that grows like that one did, and to have so much support, and then, you've got MSNBC talking about it, Morning Joe and all that, and they're giving them kudos. So I think the response to them was good. You know what? Someone needed to step up and say, what I've been saying, which is that the people of Oxford, the people of Ole Miss, this community, this oasis as I call it, that, we don't stand for those ideals. So, you know what? It was good that we had some students that put themselves in that position to step up.
So were these counter protests promoted by any particular group, or was it just an assembly of students that were just like, hey, we don't stand for this?
You know what? I think there was a couple of student body groups that came up with this, and I gotta apologize. I don't know the specific name of the group that actually came up with actually started to come up with the idea for gathering people for kind of a counter protest. But I mean, like I said, it was all students that set it up and planned it.
So what has the environment been like around Oxford in the days following this event?
The way I see it, and I'm out on the town a lot. I was out on the town on Saturday, going to different restaurants and stuff, and I've been on campus at sporting events and off campus. You know what? We're glad those people are gone. I think here the people have moved on because it's not us. That wasn't us. Those people were from out of town. Like I said, they kind of convoyed. A lot of people here made a big deal about kind of the leader of the Confederate 901 group. He was bearing a Mississippi State hat, but you know what? I don't look too far into that. But the point was they were not from here, so I think people pretty much moved on. Business as usual. Tonight, obviously, we host, top 10 nationally ranked Tennessee Volunteers. So, you know what? It's a sold-out game. Another one. We've had about 4 or 5 this year, which is huge. First-year coach. I think, people have moved on. I think we've got a good basketball team. We've got a good baseball team. Both are in the swings, getting to the important parts of their seasons. And so, you know what? I think everyone's just rallying around the university and around the teams.
I know that Tennessee, obviously, you mentioned it, a very good team, and Ole Miss also having a good year. What do you think the crowd reaction and attendance will be like at that game?
Oh, I think it's going to be awesome. I'm going myself. Most of my friends are going. We've had, last year this basketball team won 12 games. And right now I think we're sitting at 19-8 or 19-9, somewhere in that neighborhood. A couple more wins, we're in the tournament. We have arguably the nicest arena in all of the Southeastern Conference. It's sold out tonight on a Wednesday night. Everyone will be there. It'll be loud. You know what? And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Rebs hang close with those Tennessee Volunteers and maybe even pull off the upset.
Fonde, it was great having you on. I appreciate you taking your time with me.
Yeah, Brian. Hey, absolutely, my man. Happy to do it. Hopefully, this gives off a good idea of what's been going on in Oxford. Obviously, like I say, this is a great place. You need to come check it out for yourself, maybe for a baseball weekend or something, and write about some of the stuff that's going on up here. I bet you would really love it. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. I enjoy talking to you.
All right, my man. You take care, and hopefully some good luck to the Rebs.
Hey, awesome, man. Hotty toddy. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, you're the man.
All right, see you, buddy.
Great experience there, learning more about Ole Miss from Tyler Fonde. He talked a little bit about what was going on, the kneeling. I'm going to talk about Colin Kaepernick now, the man who started it all. But first, I'm going to get into that Robert Kraft topic. Here it is, my top 10 things you probably didn't know about Mr. Kraft, Bob Kraft, or his other nickname that I'll mention later. Starting with number 1. Kraft is 77 and was born in Brooklyn, Massachusetts. He also gets a ton of crap from NFL people, for better or worse, about hanging out with much younger people and dating much younger women. Number 2. By much younger, I'm referencing 39-year-old Ricky Noel Lander. Number 3. In case you missed it, Kraft helped the actress audition for the internship, starring Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson. My favorite part. Bob, you were really good up there. I didn't mean that in a sexual way, but not that it wasn't erotic. Ricky, I am so embarrassed. Bob, well, now we're even because dancing in front of you was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Number 4. He won a bidding war over President Donald Trump and current Rams owner Stan Kroenke in terms of buying the Patriots. He began buying Patriot season tickets in 1971, Section 217, and bought Provisor's deli beef sandwiches on the way to the stadium. My next one, number 5. Tom Brady calls him RKK. Kraft calls the quarterback, quote, one of the most amazing human beings in my life. Number 6. He also has a $700 Gisele Bündchen photo book in his office. Nudies. He also has a picture with every living president, Jackie Kennedy, the Dalai Lama, and Gisele's husband wearing a yarmulke. Number 7. He was raised Jewish and built the Kraft Center for Jewish Life at Columbia University. P.S. He was also the class president there. Number 8. He wears a customized pair of Air Force One Nike shoes. Number 9. He's a regular on the Manhattan/Hamptons party scene. Yes, the same Hamptons where the Warriors courted Kevin Durant. Whatever they're mixing in those drinks, it must breed champions. Number 10. A quote from Kraft that just about sums it all up. Quote, when you own the team, at some point someone figures out that ownership can mess it up. And maybe if you look around the league, you'll see maybe that has happened. I'll tell you, there'll be no team in the NFL that will win consistently without having good ownership. So I don't worry. Kraft, you might want to start worrying. Oh man, now on to the Kaepernick story. You may have heard, you may not have heard, Kaepernick was has given a proposition of getting $20 million to play in either the XFL or in the Alliance. A little history lesson for you. That doesn't necessarily work when it comes to having a successfully run minor league spring league. Now, here's a little history lesson perfectly encapsulated by this quote from former NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle regarding the USFL in the 1980s. This quote specifically coming in the summer of 1982. Here it is. Quote, what will happen is that they will play, they will start to lose money, then they will spend too much money on players and get deeper in the hole. And just about the time they are ready to go out of business, they will take a lawsuit against us. This is how it has been historically. It will happen again with this league. Folks, the XFL, the Alliance, neither of whom need to get into this historical problem of overpaying players and hoping that it works just by getting marquee players. Some historical notes. In that USFL, Herschel Walker was given the richest pro contract in football history. Steve Young, coming out of BYU, a $40 million contract. These both were way richer than what was given on the typical market in the NFL. In that USFL, you had 3 consecutive Heisman Trophy winners signing for that league. You had Walker, obviously, Mike Rozier out of Nebraska, and Doug Flutie, the Boston College quarterback. before that, 1970s, the World Football League really fell into the fate, maybe even more directly. You had really just this scheme of trying to overpay players in hopes that it could draw attention. A big player in particular, Dolphins fullback Larry Zonka, got paid $467,000 per year in that World Football League. In the NFL, he was only making $50,000, a 834% raise, and he once said what he learned most about the experience was that you can get paid a lot of money playing football. Now, when I continue on this topic, the AAF, the Alliance of American Football, started up a couple weeks back, and I know I really didn't get to the opportunity to touch on it, but really in this segment, I just want to talk about the good things that I think could arise from this league, starting with how these players are acquired and where they're coming from. First off, I really do believe it is a great avenue for picking up new players coming from different places, some of them experienced, some of them college players, or maybe even guys that got invited to NFL camps that didn't play this coming season or were cut in the preseason or even during the year for that matter. A great avenue. Special shout out to my good buddy John Wolford, a Jacksonville Bishop County product, indeed, playing quarterback for the Arizona Hotshots. In terms of players, I think it's a great idea to have this regional territorial concept that they have. Basically, the idea is that these teams can pick up players from colleges around their area. For example, the Birmingham team has acquired Trent Richardson, who played running back at Alabama. In terms of specific teams, I beg your pardon here. I got some numbers from the Salt Lake, Arizona game a couple weeks ago. Salt Lake has 17 players from Utah colleges, and Arizona has 8 from theirs, respectively. Now, what this can do, really, it can spurn local interests. In these minor leagues, they have television contracts, but what can really help boost the public perception, or maybe not perception, but the public draw in the area is if you have some nice familiarity with the players, making the local communities that much more interested. To give you a historic example, I really think that this helped with the Cleveland Browns really early in their history. They had Paul Brown coach the team, who had massive success at the high school level and coaching at Ohio State. In that state of Ohio, I beg your pardon, brought in a lot of guys from Ohio to play on the team. You had guys like Lavelli, you had guys like Luke Rosa, several marquee Ohio players that joined the team that were basically recruited by Paul Brown. Obviously, his coaching experience in the state really allowed the Browns not only to be the best team in the All-America Football Conference, but it really enabled them to become easily the top selling team in terms of interest and fan appeal. Another interesting concept that I think could maybe gain way in the National Football League, the idea of hiring medical personnel, the league hiring medical personnel versus them coming from the teams. I think with the recent added exposure in terms of concussion talks, in terms of other health situations. I know the Hall of Fame, many of the players were wanting medical benefits or insurance. I think that the image of having league-hired medical personnel, I think, really will aid in the image of professional football. I think the NFL, while it doesn't currently have this in place, I think it might be an interesting concept to look at, especially when it comes to them considering what to do next. Another interesting tidbit, the idea of the play clock. Now, if for these games they have the play clock down to 35 seconds, when watching it, I did feel a little bit of difference, a little change in the pace of play. In terms of the offenses that I was watching when I watched Arizona and Salt Lake in particular a couple of weeks ago, both college coaches featured in this game. So the offenses did look like they had a little college wrinkle. You were experimenting with those offenses in pro football. A lot of spread concepts, a lot of RPO. In general, you had a game that was about two and a half ish hours long. Not terribly short, but if you really think about it, that's about a 30 minute change from a typical NFL game. That's usually 3 hours, maybe a little bit of change added onto that. So that 30 minutes could be a big deal. I don't know that the NFL is in a rush to change the play clock, but I think for these games in particular, maybe not a bad idea. Keeps the fans watching. This age of cell phones. In terms of the commercials, there was really, I felt, a pretty small amount of advertising and commercials in general, given that this league is probably out looking for money, but a low amount of ads, keeping the fans watching, quick plays, and with that clock, I really think that could play a difference. Probably the rule that I think will probably be the most difficult for the NFL to adapt, or maybe the one that they'd probably be most reluctant to adapt, would probably be the kickoff rule. In fact, this league does not have kickoffs. When possession changes after scores, they line it up at 25. An interesting concept. Really, it was a little weird for me watching it. Definitely a football traditionalist. Watching a game without kickoffs was kind of odd, but it may in fact reduce injuries. I don't know what the current statistics are on injuries, but perhaps the lowering of those high-intensity hits could in fact be something to look at, although I really think the NFL will not change that in the near future. But the only way you can look at something is if you experiment it. And with that being said, the Alliance also has this policy where they have an extra official in the booth who can change calls from the booth. Not even a replay, but just merely another official who has a special role in either correcting calls or making calls that went unnoticed. What happened in the playoff game between the Saints and the Rams, the controversial no call on a potential pass interference. A call like that could be changed in the Alliance. And during a sequence, there actually was a call that the booth official made, and it happened pretty quickly. So I think that in general, with obvious calls, you would not have to necessarily give it a long extended period to look over them, but merely just having an extra official, seeing those obvious blemishes that, could happen with officials. I know they're not perfect, and we prefer complaining about them more often than praising them. So I think with that extra official making a quick correction in terms of things that the NFL could implement, I think that may be the easiest one of them all. So I think in general we can keep track of what is happening in this league, and as time goes on, watch the experimentation, see what maybe perhaps the NFL can implement from this minor spring league that, by the way, is not competing with the NFL. Also a very smart move. You don't want to compete with the dog. You want to be with the dog for now. In the Alliance Football League, I think good measures in terms of creating a successful spring league. Folks, a great edition of the Bryant Rose Show. Sorry for the hold up these last couple of weeks. It's been a busy stretch for me academically and with a few projects I've been working on. I really hope you enjoyed this show. Bryant Roche signing off. Thank you very much.